The X-Men and the Brotherhood of Mutants. World War M. Chapter 3. Honey for the Honey Badger. Professor Xavier sat there, his finger on his temple. His eyes were closed. Focusing was written all over his face. "Hey, what's he doing?" Scott asked Magneto. "He is trying to reach out to the X-Men and Brotherhood members across the world, making sure they either get to us or get to somewhere safe," Magneto replied. "Gotcha. We having any luck?" Scott asked. "Yes, a few. Storm and Shadowcat have gone to retrieve a few of them," Magneto stated. "Okay, I'll round up a second team, just in case he finds more," Scott replied. Scott then walked off and started making sure that those at the hideout were okay and to build a second team. Storm and Shadowcat walked into a church on the outskirts of Texas. "It's a shame we can't just fly." "I miss flying," Storm sighed. "Luckily we have a jet that can turn invisible, huh?" Shadowcat muttered. "True, but I am one with the skies," Storm replied. "How is T'Challa handling all of this?" Shadowcat asked as they walked through the empty church. "I have not spoken to him properly. I decided dragging down the King of Wakanda was not a wise decision." Storm sighed. "Wait, you guys aren't getting divorced, are you?" Shadowcat barked as she stopped in her tracks and pulled Storm to face her. "Please, child, no. He is telling the government and those after us that I have magically disappeared off the face of the planet, and if we wish to talk, we are to use a technology and communication system built by Shuri. It is that on a wavelength not even Tony Stark can find," Storm explained. "Okay, thank God. We do not need more bad news. Jubilee's death is all I can take right now," Shadowcat muttered. Then a sound of clanking echoed from the back room. Storm dived behind a pillar and Shadowcat snuck up to the wall, and with her genetic mutant power she phased through it. Just her face, enough that she could see through it and saw the three men picking up a skeleton. She pulled away and crept back up to Storm. "Three guys, they've got guns, and there's a skeleton in there," Shadowcat muttered. "I'm on it. Stay behind me," Storm replied. They both stormed towards the door and Storm kicked it down. They walked in and Storm's eyes turned white. She held out her hand and a twister appeared, which threw one of the men across the room. He slammed into the van that was parked there. "We got one!" another soldier yelled. The other two aimed their guns and started firing. Shadowcat phased through the floor. She appeared behind one of the soldiers. She kicked the soldier in the back of the legs, knocking the guy to his knees. Then she grabbed his head and phased back into the ground, bringing the soldier down with her. She let go just in time for the soldier to smack his head against the concrete ground, knocking him out. Storm once again held out her hand and a twister appeared under the soldier, throwing the man into the air, smacking him against the ceiling. He fell to the ground unconscious. Both X-Men ran over to the skeleton. They examined it and Storm ran her hand over it. "It's made out of metal," Storm gasped. "Wait, who is it?" Shadowcat barked. Storm examined the knuckles of the skeleton. It only had one blade extending from it. "Oh my God, I think it's Honey Badger," Storm said with a caught breath, tears filling her eyes. "Not again!" Shadowcat cried out. 4 hours earlier. Honey Badger walked into the church. She removed her visor and pulled down her mask. She zipped up her jacket and she sat down in one of the back rows. "Okay, I'm not religious, but the world is not in my favour or my friends. I need some backup here," Honey Badger muttered out loud. "Do you think you'll get a response?" a man's voice asked. Honey Badger looked over to her left, and there sat, a space from her, was a man looking deadly at her. "I ain't usually religious," Honey Badger replied awkwardly. "That's a good thing." "I don't think he's listening today anyway," the man said sternly. Then he turned and looked straight at Honey Badger. She suddenly had a sickening feeling in her stomach. She clenched her fist and a single blade extended from her middle knuckle and she swung it at the man. He caught her wrist and slammed it against the headboard of the bench in front of them. Then he punched her in the face and then again. He then slammed her head against the bench in front of them. Honey Badger managed to pull her arm free and she kicked back. She jumped up onto her feet and launched herself into the air. She pulled her face mask over her face and slotted on her visor, then extended extended the other adamantium blade from her opposite hand. She landed on the middle aisle as she then turned to see the man had stood up and stepping out of the middle aisle. "They call me Onyx," the man introduced himself. "You seem to know who I am. My guess is you killed Jubilee," Honey Badger stated. "News travels fast, huh?" "And yes, I did. I killed her. It was rather easy, actually. My plan is to pick out the weaker ones until the more important ones come running," Onyx said with a devilish grin. Honey Badger dropped down into a fighting stance. Onyx pulled out 2 skimmer sticks and he pressed the button on both of them, and a solid holographic construct formed into the head of axes, making his sticks turn into twin battle axes. Honey Badger scoffed at the sight, knowing full well that her mutant gene gave her the ability to be immune to pain. She ran at Onyx, jabbing her blades out, one after the other. Onyx took a step back, dodging the strikes. He swung one of his axes, catching Honey Badger's suit, tearing it ever so slightly. She jumped up and swung a kick. Onyx used one of his axes to block the attack, then he used the other axe to slam into her, throwing her across the room. She crashed into a stone pillar. She landed on one knee. She stood up quickly and her adamantium spine clicked. She felt no pain at all. She then turned to see Onyx flying at her. He slammed into her and swung his axe into her stomach, blood exploding all over the blade. He then pulled the blade out of Honey Badger and she looked down at the gasping wound. She waited for the tissue and the muscle and the skin to start sewing itself back together, but there was nothing. It didn't happen. Her healing factor didn't kick in. "My axe is built with nanites, that when come in contact with mutant genes, it possesses a toxin that either slows or blocks it from triggering. In other words, you're not going to heal," Onyx sneered. Honey Badger stood there shocked. She looked at Onyx. She then ducked down and swung her leg under Onyx, tripping him over. Then she bolted to the back room. Onyx jumped to his feet, dropping one of his axes. He aimed his wrist gauntlet and shot a grapple hook, which hit Honey Badger in the shoulder. He then pulled her off her feet with all his strength. She used one of her blades to cut herself free and then jumped to her feet. Onyx leapt forward and tackled her to the ground, punching her in the face multiple times, over and over. Her visor finally shattered. Her nose exploded with blood. Then he pulled her up by the collar and slammed her down on the ground again. "You know I can't feel a thing, right?" Honey Badger coughed through a mouthful of blood. Onyx stood up and pulled Honey Badger up off the ground and dragged her to the back room. He walked into the back room, dropping the X-Men member on the ground. "Why drag me out here?" she grunted. "I ain't gonna kill someone in the house of worship. I'm not a monster. Besides, this is a garage turned into a storage closet." "It's fine," Onyx replied. She stood up and swung both her blades at Onyx. He blocked both of them, then she jabbed out and her blade penetrated Onyx's shoulder. "You bitch!" Onyx snapped. He grabbed her wrist and pushed her blade out of his shoulder and pulled her in close and punched her in the face, then spun around and pulled her over his shoulder, slamming her onto the ground. He then pulled out a grenade-looking device and pressed the trigger. He then slipped into her wound that was caused from his axe. She gasped as she felt his hand inside of her stomach. He then let go of the device and removed his hand. He then took several steps back. The device imploded. Then her skin became red hot. She couldn't feel the pain, but she felt extremely uncomfortable. It felt like something inside of her was boiling and was trying to rip itself out of her. She struggled to breathe. She struggled to see. Then her muscles, her tissue and her skin, her hair, every feature of her burnt away, evaporated, leaving nothing but her adamantium skeleton. Then Onyx walked over to the smoking skeleton and he pulled out a small device and pressed the side button, and it doubled in size. It was some type of buzzsaw. The blade was a unique tool made of a mixture of adamantium and vibranium and other type of metals found from across space. He picked up the skeleton and moved quickly as Honey Badger could start regenerating at any point. The buzzsaw started spinning and he cut through the skull and removed the top of it and carefully removed the brain. He then pulled out his white cube and it scanned the brain. Once finished scanning, he then pulled out a small box which also doubled in size. He then placed the brain inside the box, making sure it was sealed. Onyx then pressed his communicator on his mask as his mask materialized over his face. "Target confirmed. Honey Badger. Target eliminated," he said into his communicator. Then he left the back room and headed to his next target.
What you have just listened to is a product created by the Three Ranger Bros Studio. hosted by 3 cosplaying fathers who
happen to be massive geeks of all sorts of fandoms.
They are Mark, the Red Cornish Ranger,
Cosplay Dude 637,
and Tai Tiger.
The studio covers different types of YouTube videos, TikToks, podcasts, and live streams.
If you wish to find out who cosplays who, the YouTube channels, the TikTok accounts, and the podcasts, and all of the other social media platforms,
please go to the 3rangerbrostudios.com.